It is Chatty Tuesday. This is Cyberpunk Utopia, and I am Teresa.
And I'm Paul.
And we are going to digress into many tangents today and take it, what I love, all over the place. But Paul's put enough structure around me that I think we can get this out. So I think there's three main things we want to hit. The first thing, we want to let the audience know who we are, where we're from, and why we think this podcast is really important for the community.
Right. So, why is it worth listening to these two?
I have no idea. Don't listen to me. No, do it. All right. So Paul, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where you from? Let the audience know.
Yeah. So I'd like to say I'm originally from the Deep South.
When you're talking to American, that has a very different connotation.
Right. Exactly. That's why I like that gag. So very, very far south.
So how south are you from?
So even further south than that. I'm originally from South Africa, although I've lived the majority of my life in Europe at this point. It was interesting when I realized that. It's interesting moment. When you've outlived the place you grew up in? In a way, yeah. I mean, I go back every year. But indeed, I'm probably I'm more European now than African.
How does that feel? I mean, that's interesting.
Sure. Yes, I've lived most of my adult life in Europe. I lived in the UK. My family has a British background. I lived in the UK for a number of years. And then I found myself right here in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and I've been here for about 15. I think I've stopped counting in 15 years. Yeah.
And have you been in tech the whole time while you're here in Amsterdam?
I've always been a tech guy. I studied software engineering at university. My first job was as a software engineer living in beautiful Cape Town. And I've been doing it ever since. So probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I made the switch from software engineering to product management.
Wah, wah, wah.
There you go.
I know, right?
That's what we're both doing now. Over to the dark side.
I can try to find a button. Ha! Yeah, so, so Paul and I met on our recent gig. And we had a chance to work together on a product team. And I just always really valued your, I wouldn't say technical perspective, but your empathy for the engineers and the things that would be required, because this was not my strength, to help the team understand all the pieces that we're going to need, right? All the applications. And one of the early things that you brought to me in the product, let's call it our toolkit, was this idea of a Lego kit. And I know we're starting to play with that now, so we won't go too much into that today. But my question for you is, how was that transition moving from engineer to product?
Yeah, so I kind of see myself a little bit as a form of translator. People always told me, you're very good at explaining things. So I was never necessarily the best engineer in the room, but I kind of always, understood what a good solution looked like. And so I found myself pretty good at being able to communicate around different perspectives. And I think that's been a very valuable skill also as a product manager. So I still see myself today as kind of a translator. And I think, that concept of the Lego kit was very useful to explain to people, okay, how do you go from these technical building blocks to an actual tangible solution? What was interesting with that is you saw that and I can see it now, and oh wow, that's pretty powerful.
Right. So I'll take the mic over for a little bit and tell a little bit about myself. My name is Maria Teresa de Jesus Mendez. I'm going to start saying the whole thing. I was originally from a little place called Albuquerque, New Mexico, famous for Breaking Bad and High School Musical. At least that's how I help the Europeans understand where I grew up. And spent most of my life in California. Grew up there, went to school in the Midwest, made the mistake of going to law school, still paying for that. And eventually, like everybody who failed at law school, had to figure out how to repurpose that education. And I landed in product. I think I did community stuff early in the the early 2000s, 2007. Landed in California and worked for a bunch of startups. Just really enjoyed. It was a fun time. I think it was quite before the shitification. We'll have to figure out how to bleep that out later. Kind of happened in the Valley, and I just had so much fun working with really smart people, trying to do things. One of my boss at my first company said is like, I just want to know if the users are going to flick the light. I don't care if it works. And I think that also says a lot about my lineage as a product person. I was just always more curious, and being in those environments allowed that to foster my curiosity. And when it didn't, I had to find a new gig. So that is kind of my lineage. But I just love working with tech teams. And one of the things that I always struggled with was helping the engineers see my vision. And that's why this Lego kit that I think we're going into, because I'm a divergent thinker, and having that visual way of communicating all the underlying applications and systems and how they related, and or how you could create them in ways that allowed them to be connected at the right places and independent as they needed to be, which I think is huge in software development, because I see where most of the mistakes are made. But now that we have AI and these sorts of new technologies, I'm just really excited to take a lot of the things that you and I have built a toolkit up and take that to the universe, metaverse, whatever this thing is, and help people leverage that. So I guess that's a little bit about me and kind of why I want to be doing this.
And so how did you make your way to Little Amsterdam?
That is a great question. Great segue too. How does anybody make a big leap of faith on themselves? They fall in love. And I always love telling this story. God bless Tinder. Met a really cute woman. Didn't even meet in San Francisco, but I had just kind of was at the end of my time there, and I knew it. And this face came across my Tinder screen, and I'm all like, fuck yeah, gotta go. And that didn't work out the way I thought it was going to, but I ended up here, and I don't regret that choice. I don't regret choosing me. The city of Amsterdam has been one of the safest, most fascinating experiences that I've ever had. So now I'm going to flip the question around on you. How'd you end up here in Amsterdam?
So yeah, I have a kind of a bit of a similar story. Also moved for love. And here we are. Yeah. So it's a pretty common story, actually, I think.
Call me a romantic. I know there's like imperialists and romantic. I can't remember. Something like that, right? Comes from Motorcycle Diaries. Great book. But I love being a romantic. I know that the pragmatic side of me doesn't always come out, but why else would you do something?
So we were discussing earlier, like what makes Amsterdam special, do you think?
I'm going to have to take a second to really take that question in. Whew. It has to do with this concept called gewoon, which in Dutch means normal, right? But normal in the sense that we all understand that everybody's unique and individual, and we have to build a society and a culture. They have this thing called asociaal, right? Don't do something that's asociaal. But those boundaries are always gray when it comes to people being able to express who they are individually, but yet still make sure that we're all delivering value to the greater society. And that's been my experience and the energy here. There's just so much. I think you and I one day went over an index called the Trust Index. And Paul's always showing me these great things, and my mind just gravitates towards them. And the two highest places with the two high on the index was China. And that makes a lot of sense because they're extremely structured. And at that time, they had a good social contract. And I think it was about 79%. And then the Amsterdam or the Netherlands. But I really just think of Amsterdam. And then it kind of spreads out to the Radstad, something like that. So for you.
Yeah, so kind of, Amsterdam's a small city, but it just punches above its weight in so many areas. And I think there's such a vibrant tech scene here today. I really like the story of, some of the early internet pioneers in Amsterdam. It really was the center of internet adoption back in the 90s. And Amsterdam played a pioneering role in adoption of the internet. It was really driven by a mix of sort of hacker culture, DIY philosophy, and really a belief in digital open spaces. Also related to the sort of the squatter movement that originated in the 1980s, really created a culture of grassroots innovation. And there's really something that you see today. There's a sense now of, more criticism of the internet in terms of the way it's so dominated by big tech. But that's also led to some movements to kind of take back the internet. So I think that relates very nicely to the Cyberpunk Utopia mission.
I mean, if we're to put our two comments together, mine's always going to be more as how do you say, emotional, and the way that I see the energy flows to this city. But then I love the way that you come through with what the city has actually practically done, understanding that it shifts and how does it build a 100-year plan to help make sure that this is a healthy place 100 years from now. And that's what I see. And you mentioned the squatter movement. I've always been fascinated with this, and it was definitely something that, if you look at cycles, it's like the 80s, right? So the internet has been through basically two cycles, the 60s, the 80s. 90s were interesting, and now, we're on another, I don't know if you want to do a 20 or a 30-year cycle, but we're definitely there.
Sure, yeah. So there's quite a few sort of movements, initiatives going on, which we'll probably dive into over various episodes. One of them is called Public Spaces. They have a manifesto, and they actually have a conference here in the city every year. Last year's conference, the theme was Taking Back the Internet, all about how do we as citizens, organizations, governments regain control of our data and digital lives. And we may actually put up a little AI-generated podcast with a bit of a summary of all of the goings on at last year's conference. Another more recent initiative is the city has an AI vision that they've published, which again aligns really well with our values. It's both optimistic and pragmatic, and really focused on human-centered technology, while still acknowledging risks.
I just see the way that the Dutch approach everything, and that's actually kind of back to one of the points that I think it's really important of why I listen to us, is me, especially as an American living outside the United States, for the first time designing products, had to realize that there's a whole bunch of places that doesn't speak English. And how do we build things that work for people who have different ways of working? And taking those perspectives is so important in avoiding shittification of products, and understanding too where the limits are of products, or of anything. So I'm back on my high horse, but again, that leads me back to Amsterdam and some of the really cool things that they've implemented. For you, what are 2 or 3 things that you think are important for taking back our I'll say energy, but our digital privacy and basically our attention,
Yeah, so I think it's, what we mentioned in our previous episodes about democratization and decentralization, but also I think assisting local communities in really driving innovation and adoption. Just taking sort of practical, realistic approach over hype.
Do we have anything in the toolkit coming up that we can tease with?
So we're busy working on the Lego Kit episodes. I think with that one we're going to do show a few proofs of concepts. So, one of them is going to be our AI co-host to show you how you can engage with a chatbot in a very natural way, maybe one that can also challenge us on some of our thinking.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I've been using chatbots quite a bit for lots of things, but the one area that I need to be is challenged. And, honestly, humans still provide that best, even though they don't always give timely feedback. Cool.
Yeah, and we'll take a look at some AI agents, which, that's really going to be what we'll see in 2025. So those are where you give over a little bit more control. You say, rather than you give it a prompt and you get a response, you say, here's a goal I want you to go off and solve, and it'll go off and come back a bit later. So there's a number of those that are starting to appear. There's some very simple ones like ChatGPT is got something called tasks. We can say, hey, every Sunday at 3 p.m. send me an email with a summary of the sports results from my favorite team. It'll go off and do that for you. That's a very simple one. But we've also seen ones that will go off and operate your computer. They can do all your grocery shopping for you. There's also some that can do what they call deep research. So you can give it a kind of a research task, and it'll go off for 30 minutes and come back with a very well researched report that could take someone maybe 8 or 10 hours to generate.
Oh, I already have a prompt for you. I've already even spec'd it out, and I think it would be perfect for this episode.
Bring it on.
I will. And I'll give you a little teaser. I basically want to pull together some advanced mystical data through Google.
Oh, dear.
I know. But you know what? It's an agent. I've got cleared things. I got websites I want to hit. I want to pull that data, and I want to put it in one view. Doesn't matter what it is.
Absolutely. We're going to do it.
Yes, we're going to do that. Cool. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening. We're going to start saying, please subscribe, do all those things that will support us. But right now, it's just my mom. So I love you, Mom.
Looking forward to the next episode. We are going to do these Chatty Tuesdays, I guess, whenever we feel like it. So
I think that's what we agreed, right?
Yeah, indeed. It's going to be a bit of a stream of consciousness, but so if you see the episode type as a Chatty Tuesday, you know what to expect.
Yeah. So should we talk a little bit about the episode types that we're trying to do?
Yeah, I think broadly we're going to have sort of a bit more of a narrative type episode that is kind of telling a story. We're going to have, of course, Chatty Tuesdays, which are these ones. We're going to do then a bit more of hands-on, maybe deep dives, where maybe show some practical applications. And then the final type will be basically interviews. So we're going to be talking to some local people to hear their stories on grassroots adoption.
Yeah, and I think first I have to give Paul most of the credit for putting some structure on me. But we also wanted different ways to challenge ourselves to help tell this story. Because I think he and I have been talking, on something we started, which was Chatty Tuesdays, which were all over the place. And as my mom says, that's more like sketching. But now we're actually making a product. And this is a different product than he and I have ever made, but the principles are still the same.
Yeah, so I think as product managers, it's all about solving problems for people. And I think that's pretty broad. So, we need to figure out who our audience is and what kind of value we can receive. So the important part is getting some of our content out there, and then we start getting feedback, and that's kind of when the fun begins.
Yeah, and a little bit scary, but I've got a really good friend sitting next to me, so I'm excited.
Looking forward to it.
Cool. All right. Shall I take us out?
Let's do it.
Thank you.
Subscribe to the Cyberpunk Utopia podcast, your guide to agency in an AI-augmented world.